Bar none, the fastest growing segment of radio control aircraft are the almost ready to fly or the ARF type airplanes like you see here. And boy, for the modeler, it's just fantastic. I mean, you can open the box, spend a few hours putting these things together, and you're ready to fly. But then on the other hand, we need to talk about, okay, if you have a mishap with one of these things, whether it be minor, whether it be major, what are the things you really look for to repair an aircraft that you physically actually haven't assembled from a kit? First thing we're going to do is start with the Nosey aircraft. We're going to consider, although this aircraft here isn't really damaged, we're going to consider what kind of damage can take place to the front of the aircraft and what you should look for before you fly it again. Okay, naturally, the first thing that could contact the ground or could be damaged is the propeller. First thing to do, pull this spinner off and make sure the prop nut is tight, and while you're in there, take a good look at the hub of the propeller. Flex the propeller, make sure you don't have any cracks, fissures going down the length of the blade or anything like that, okay? Make sure your prop is good. Next thing you want to look at is the nose gear area of the aircraft, which would be the area where the trunnion mount is and the steering linkage goes. Naturally, these are nitromethane and lubricated engines. A lot of this oil and residue creeps down into this motor mount area, and from what I've seen on a lot of these ARFs, the fuel proofing probably isn't the best in this area like it would if you'd build it from your own kit. So take a good look at this area for what we call fuel soaking is what it really is when the oil works its way into the plywood. Flex this nose gear, make sure everything is tight. If it isn't tight, you're going to have to get in here and do a little repair work. And typically the best way to do that on one of these is there's screws that hold the motor mount on. I would remove the motor from the aircraft, unhook your fuel lines, take this thing off, and you're going to have to get in there and probably replace some plywood. And it's not that difficult to do. A lot of times with a Zona saw or a little single blade saw, you can drill a few holes in the soft area or the damaged area, saw that square out, cut another piece of plywood, insert it, and then get inside your fuel tank compartment here and do a little reinforcement on the back side of that. Take some 64 32nd plywood or whatever and put some strips around the inside on your replacement joint here to make sure that this is good and strong and glued in well. In these fuel tanks, most of them are pre-assembled. They have already their fuel lines in there, and inside the fuel tank there's a thing we call a clunk, which what a clunk is, it's just a little weighted, typically a filter type item that's on the back of a piece of fuel line in the tank. And what this clunk does is it moves with the aircraft's attitude, so it always stays into the fuel supply to draw fuel for the engine, okay? If this thing hits hard on the nose, a lot of times that flexible fuel line with the weight on the back will literally bend itself around the tank and get stuck in the front. And when that happens, say you fix your motor, you fix your landing gear, you fuel the airplane, get ready to go, and you're trying to start it, if this clunk is stuck somewhere in the front upper part of that tank, the motor won't be able to draw the fuel and you won't be able to start it. So the thing to do is if you do have a hard landing and you haven't really noticed a whole lot of damage in the front that you haven't had to repair, it's a good idea to get inside this fuel tank compartment and take a good look at that clunk. These tanks they're clear, you can see in them. Just take the thing out, you can shake it around a little bit and make sure that that clunk is loose and it can lay in the back of the fuel tank. Okay? Now we'll move on to the radio section of the aircraft. A lot of times this servo tray in here can come loose. And you really won't realize that until you try to fly an airplane again and kind of load it up with some high G's, and next thing you know you run out of either elevator or rudder or something like that and the aircraft goes into the ground. You know, and you just take a cursory look in there, you really don't notice that these glue joints are very small if you can see them. They're just a little line of CA. It's hard to really tell if it's glued in there securely or not. So if you're checking your engine compartment out, stick your hand in there and grab that servo tray and give it a good tug. Make sure that son of a gun is in there. And if it isn't in there, that repair is very, very simple. Get some good medium CA, put a nice bead along each side and use some kicker and resecure it, or even maybe take some small triangle balsa wood stock, stick it in the corners, and make sure this son of a gun's in there secure, because if this comes loose, that's going to be the end of your model. Another thing I always like to look at is servo linkages. If you look in here, you'll see your nose gear is a rod that has like a screw clamp connector onto the servo arm itself. A lot of times in a hard landing, this motor mount takes a jolt, this thing will come loose and you'll lose your nose gear steering. Also, while you're in there, take a good look at your your elevator and rudder connections. These push rods naturally take your servo control back to the back of the airplane. If you cartwheel it, you bang the tail, sometimes these can pop off. And if you look here, there's little pieces of fuel line that are on each linkage, and that maintains that clamping pressure, so in a major jolt or something like that, these things can't pop off. Make sure those little pieces of fuel line or clamps are on your linkages. If they're not there, replace them. It's always a good idea to have some type of a locking feature on those linkages. Okay, as we move on to the tail, we're going to look at our wing mounting bolts. Now in a cartwheel situation, once again, all this energy that hits the wingtip of the aircraft, it's all going to transmit to these two screws and the peg in the front that goes into this slot. But this area is very, very susceptible to damage without much of a major impact at all because you have so much of a moment arm clear out to the wingtip. Take a good look at this area. Make sure that the peg on the front of your wing is good and solid that goes into this slot. Also, you want to check this mount and your screws. A lot of times these mounts will break loose, and once again, it's just a very, very minimum glue joint in there. It's hard to see. Grab onto it, give it a good tug, make sure everything's solid. Take a good look at your screws. A lot of times these nylon screws, even though they won't shear, they'll stretch. So pull your screws out, look at them, make sure your threads look good all the way down the line, and we should be secure in the wing mounting department. Now we'll move on to the tail. Once again, in a cartwheel situation or a hard crash, these things can and do come loose, and a lot of times they're really hard to tell. Naturally, once again, you want to give it a good flex, make sure everything's good and solid. If some of the wood structure is broke above the glue joint, at that point in time then we're going to have to pull the covering off, get in there, see what the damage is, make the correct repairs. And when you do repair something inside of a covered surface, you don't only glue the broke joint itself, you actually get on the back side, get some reinforcements in there, get some either plywood or something like that, and back up your joints with another piece to make sure that it can take the load. We're going to take, once again, a look at our linkage, make sure that our control horn's not broken. We have a securing device on the link that attaches to the control horn. You can wiggle your servo a little bit, make sure everything sounds right. Then we're going to flip it over and take a look at the bottom, same area. You can see the glue joints along the side here. We want to give the stabilizer a good flex. Make sure you don't see any looseness there. If you do, this type of a repair can be made easily by what I would do is put some thin CA first to wick it into the joint, then maybe finish it with some medium CA and some kicker. That'll do two things. It'll add strength to your repair, and it'll also help fuel-proof the area a little bit. Make sure everything's secure. Give all your hinges a tug. Once again, if they need repaired, if they don't have a hinge pin through them, you can wick a little thin CA in those kind of joints and take care of that. If you do have a hinge that's the pin type variety, a lot of times somebody put a little oil on the hinge joint, and then you can put some epoxy or something like that in there to hold the hinges in place. We finished the repair of our fuselage. Now we're going to take a look at the wing. And once again, the first place we want to focus our attention is to the mounting area of the wing. We have plywood reinforcement here that has a couple holes in it, a line that the bolts go through. And this is to make sure the bolts are properly secured into the wing and they're not only dependent on the soft balsa underlayment for their alignment. Make sure that the holes are in good shape. Take a look at it top and bottom. If any of this area is significantly damaged, this plywood overlay will have to be removed, a new piece put on, the holes re-drilled, and aligned to the bolts that are in the fuselage. Another thing we want to look at is the mounting peg on the front of the wing. This interfaces with the bulkhead that's in the front of the radio compartment, and this really takes absolutely as much of the load and the abuse as what the two screws do in the back, if not more. If you do have damage, or even if this is busted off, you don't have any choice at this point in time to get a Dremel tool or something like that. What's left in here is going to have to be completely removed and a new piece inserted and matched up to the fuselage. Okay? Something as critical as an alignment or a wing hold down device like this, I would not take the chance of just trying to glue an end back on it and trying to make a repair that way, because chances are it's not going to hold and you're going to lose your entire aircraft. So if you have damage to a structural item like this, you have no choice but to totally remove it, get inside there, and replace it. While we're looking at the bottom, once again, let's take a good look at our servo mount. Make sure that the mount is secure, nothing is broken loose. Once again, linkages, locking devices, make sure everything is secure. And then you can move the servo and take a listen to this. You know, a lot of times you'll damage gears in these servos. If you do have some broken gears, we're going to get into what it takes to open one of these things up if you desire and replace gear trains.